She paid for her son-in-law's murder, then watched her son get convicted. She tried fleeing to Vietnam and was arrested while boarding the plane. Guilty of murder 1, she claims her convictions won't hold. Will Donna Adelson prevail on appeal? Prof Jo says no. Ciao, everybody. Ciao a tutti. That's the Italian for hi. I'm Prof Jo, the law professor, and this is Prof Jo Explains, where we talk about all things law. Welcome. I'm really pleased that you're here. And we are going to be talking about Donna Adelson. I'm pretty sure that most of you know who she is. She's the chatty grandma, the manic grandma, the controlling grandma, I think a lot of people would say, the moving force behind the murder of Dan Markel, who was a law professor at Florida State Law College in Tallahassee, Florida. He was murdered in 2014. It was a murder for hire. The person who actually pulled the trigger, and I'm now going to give you, sort of the whole list of the people involved, and you can see their pictures on the screen now. The person who actually pulled the trigger was Sigfredo Garcia. The person who drove the car from Miami, where the murderers were located, and where Donna Adelson was located, to Tallahassee, where the shooting occurred. The person who drove the car was Luis Rivera, Sigfredo's best friend. Catherine Magbanoa was the go-between. She was the longtime girlfriend of Sigfredo Garcia, and for the past, or the 18 months leading up to the murder, she was also the girlfriend of Charlie Adelson. Charlie Adelson is the daughter of Donna, the person we're talking, or daughter, listen to me, male son of Donna, who is the person we're going to be talking about today, and the brother of Wendy Adelson. Wendy is the ex-wife of Dan Markel, so she's really the linchpin of all this. She married Dan Markel. They were involved in a really messy divorce. And maybe the major issue in the divorce was where the boys would be located. Wendy wanted to move back to Miami to live with mom and her dad, Harvey Adelson. Mama Donna really wanted Wendy and the grandsons back in Miami. But the stumbling block was their father, who, guess what? Wanted his kids living with him, wanted the kids nearby, didn't want to have to do a 7 or 8 hour drive whenever he saw them. He wanted them with him in Tallahassee. Everybody described him as a really wonderful father who couldn't get enough of being around his boys. So the divorce goes on, the custody proceeding goes on, and the judge ultimately tells Wendy, you're not going to be able to move to Miami with the boys. It's important for them to be near their father. At that point, then, the Adelsons did not have a way to get the boys to Miami where they wanted to be. Donna was thwarted, and Donna, as we all know from this trial, did not want to be thwarted. She didn't brook interference very well, was very agitated, and Charlie comes along and says, I know a person who knows a person. And the person he knows is Katie Magbanoa, and the person she knows is Sigfredo Garcia. The murder plot is hatched, and Dan Markel is killed. So far in this case, the the hitman, Sigfredo, the driver of the car, Luis, the middle person, Katie Magbanua, Charlie Adelson, and now Donna Adelson have all been convicted of murder. You've had 4 trials, 5 convictions. And Donna was convicted on September 4, 2025. She had her sentencing hearing on October 13, 2025. And it was a sentencing hearing on, I don't know what you would say, on high drugs. It was a sentencing hearing that you could do as a lifetime as a lawyer and never see one like it. And we're going to be watching a little of what happened at that sentencing trial, at the sentencing hearing today. And I think we should go to that now. If I didn't say it before, I'm Prof Jo, law professor, and this is Prof Jo Explains, and I'm really glad you're here. So, okay, let's talk about this sentencing hearing and also Donna's claims that she will be raising on appeal. And we have a pretty good idea of at least what some of her appeal issues will be, because chatty Donna not only chatted all the time, but she had 2 lawyers that filed more motions than you might see in a host of criminal trials, and they refiled some motions. So you can tell from the motions filed, from the arguments that were made at when Donna was convicted, from the arguments they made on a motion for a new trial, and from some of the things that were said at the sentencing hearing, we know what some of the claims on appeal will be. And I plan to go through the claims on appeal in a series of episodes. You can't get them all done in one, or at least I can't get them all done in one. And tonight I want to talk about Donna's challenge to her murder 1 conviction. But before I do that, let me give you a list of what some of the other claims on appeal I think are going to be. Donna is going to claim the jury was biased against her. She's going to claim the judge was biased against her, that she should have had, there was so much pretrial publicity that she should have had a change of venue so she could get out of the hotbed of Tallahassee, quoting Donna. She's going to challenge a dropped phone call that occurred. It was a phone call between her when Charlie was in jail the night after he was convicted. And he called Donna to talk to her. They were on the phone for a few minutes. The call dropped on his end. Donna thought that the call was over. She didn't hang up. The recording device continued. And what was heard was Donna discussing fleeing to Vietnam. So she's going to challenge the introduction of the dropped call audio and testimony about what happened. Donna had 2 jailhouse informers who testified at her trial. She's going to challenge the fact that Judge Everett, let the informers testify at her trial. She's going to, another ground for appeal is going to be a text exchange on the night of the shooting between Donna Adelson and Charlie Adelson. Donna and Harvey left for Tallahassee the late afternoon, early evening on the day Dan Markel was shot. And they went through and stopped at Charlie's house. Donna says she never stopped there. Donna says you can't prove that she stopped there because there's no cell phone data that shows it. But the experts were able to track the car from Miami to Tallahassee. And at the point at which on the road that she would have been near Charlie's house, she texts, at your house. And Charlie responds, 10 minutes. Well, that exchange she wants out. And when I do the drop call video, we'll talk about why. But that's another claim on appeal. And she's also going to claim, and this is the one that I'm doing now, that there was insufficient evidence to convict her of murder one. So we've got a slide now of the definition in Florida of murder one and being a principal to murder one. So we're going to show that. And at the same time, I'm going to play a clip of a definition of murder one and principal, which was played. It was jury instruction at Donna's trial. And so you'll be able to read along and listen to the jury instructions. And then from there, we'll move into what the evidence against Donna showed. And I don't want to give away the ending, but this isn't a mystery story. And the ending is, I don't think she'll prevail on a claim that there was insufficient evidence for murder one. So if the clip and the video come up, we can look at them now. Look at one, listen to the other.
Donna Adelson, the defendant accused of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and solicitation to commit first-degree murder. Donna Adelson is accused of first-degree murder in count one of the indictment. If you find Daniel Markel was killed by Donna Adelson, you must then consider the circumstances surrounding the killing and deciding if the killing was first-degree murder. I now instruct you on the circumstances that must be proved before Donna Adelson may be found guilty of first-degree murder. Count one. To prove the crime of first-degree premeditated murder, the state must prove the following three elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Element one, Daniel Markel is dead. Element two, the death was caused by the criminal act of Donna Adelson. Element three, there was a premeditated killing of Daniel Markel. An act includes a series of related actions arising from and performed pursuant to a single design or purpose. Killing with premeditation is killing after consciously deciding to do so. The decision must be present in the mind at the time of the killing. The law does not fix the exact period of time that must pass between the formation of the premeditated intent to kill and the killing. The period of time must be long enough to allow reflection by the defendant. The premeditated intent to kill must be formed before the killing. The question of premeditation is a question of fact to be determined by you from the evidence. It will be sufficient proof of premeditation if the circumstances of the killing and the conduct of the accused convince you beyond a reasonable doubt of the existence of premeditation at the time of the killing.
Okay, you can see now, and you heard Judge Everett talk about the elements of murder one. Daniel Markel is dead. Clearly that element is proved. The death was caused by the criminal act of Donna Adelson, and it was a premeditated killing. Well, all the evidence demonstrates it was a premeditated killing. Donna is claiming that the death was not caused by her criminal act. And to get into what the evidence is that shows it was her criminal act, we have to first look at how it is the law makes her a principal. She obviously is not the person who pulled the trigger. She's obviously not the person who drove the car to Tallahassee. Not that person either. But the definition of principal, which makes you as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger, it says that if you're a principal, it's as though you pulled the trigger. The definition says a principal helps someone to commit a crime, intended the crime to be committed, and did or said something to incite the commission of the crime. She doesn't have to be present. We know she wasn't. As a principal, she's treated as doing everything that the hitmen did. That's what makes her a principal. So the evidence at trial then for Donna has to show Daniel Markel is dead, that it was a premeditated killing, and that it was caused by Donna because she was a principal, and she was a principal because she helped someone to commit a crime. She intended the crime to be committed. How did she help the person commit the crime? She did or said something to encourage its commission. And the important part of this instruction now comes up. For first-degree murder, paying or promising to pay a hitman makes you a principal to the crime of first-degree murder. So the evidence for Donna that we're going to be looking at that says she's a principal is the evidence that shows that she paid or promised to pay to have the hit be done. So let's
and must be treated as if she had done all the things the other person or persons did if the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt, 1, the defendant intended the crime to occur, and 2, the defendant did some act or said something that was intended to and that did incite, cause, encourage, assist, or advise the other person or persons to actually commit the crime. To be a principal, the defendant does not have to be present when the crime is committed or attempted. For first-degree premeditated murder, the state must prove the defendant intended that the killing of Daniel Markel occurred. This instruction only applies to count 1 and 3 and does not apply to count 2.
Count 1 is murder 1.
If the defendant paid or promised to pay another person or persons to commit a crime, the defendant is a principal and must be treated as if she had done all of the things the person who was promised or received the money did if the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt, 1, the defendant intended the crime to occur, and 2, she made or promised the payment in exchange for the commission or promise to commit the crime or to help commit the crime, and 3, the crime was committed by the other person. To be a principal, the defendant does not have to be present when the crime is committed. This instruction only applies to count 1 and 3 and does not apply to count 2.
Okay, there's the definition again of principal. And as I say, Donna can be convicted as a principal and therefore as though she pulled the trigger herself if the jury concluded beyond a reasonable doubt that she paid or promised to pay the people who actually did the killing. Now, before we go into this a little, I don't know how many of you may have served on juries, but just listening to that instruction can tell you how confusing it can be to hear a jury instruction. They tend to be repetitive when they don't need to be. They used to be worse than they are now, but they're still not really good. I did jury instructions for the state of Nebraska, and I did pattern federal jury instructions. And it's not easy to write them, but it's a whole lot harder for a jury to listen to them. And, you know, we need to do a better job with that. So that's my little aside. But essentially, murder 1 is Dan Markel is dead. It was Donna's criminal act, and her criminal act was paying or promising to pay for the hit. And the murder was premeditated. We know that Donna, I mean, anybody who knows anything about this case knows that Donna did not like Dan Markel. That's putting it mildly. Whatever she said at her sentencing hearing about loving him, I don't think anyone who's read emails or listened to her or heard other people describe her would believe for a second that was true. She despised, if not hated, Dan Markel. He was in her way. She wanted the boys in Miami, and she was not the kind of person that brooked interference with what she wanted when she wanted it. She sent crazy emails. You remember the crazy emails. Dan Markel was a observant Jew who observed the dietary restrictions. It was a very important aspect of his life. And she said to her daughter, Wendy, let's have him baptized as a Catholic. That will get Dan the boys baptized as a Catholic. That will get Dan very upset. And I've already been to the church, and I know we can get this done in a couple of weeks. So this was just not, idle talk. According to her, she had looked into it some. Crazy talk. She also said, we'll dress the boys up in Nazi uniforms. That will get him upset. Just crazy, crazy, crazy talk. She called Dan Markel stupid to his little children. I think they were 3 and 4 at the time. And she also told the boys that their dad was keeping her sunshines, meaning the boys, away from her. And there was more. In order to get Dan Markel to agree that the boys could move to Miami, she floated the idea to Charlie and Wendy that they each contribute and pay Dan $1 million so that he'd let the boys move. If not a crazy idea, a pretty offensive one. Her behavior at the time of the bump, that's when the law enforcement decided that they were going to, what did they call it, tickle the wire. They had wiretaps on Donna and on Charlie. And they thought, how can we get them maybe to do or say something that could incriminate them? So they had an undercover person come to Donna as she was outside her condo, short distance from the boys' school, to pick the boys up. This is obviously after the murder. It's actually a couple of years after the murder. And the person playing a gangster, a gang member, tells Donna that she needs to do something for his brother, meaning Luis Rivera, who was in prison at the time. Donna's behavior was to take the paper that the person that might have been a gang member gave her, didn't even read it, and then merrily walk off to the school to pick up the boys, claiming later she was afraid of the hitman, but leading them, if he had wanted to follow her right to the school because the informer was there. But she doesn't call the police, she calls Charlie to talk about what to do about it, and they talk in code on the phone call. So that's more evidence that can be used against Donna to show her involvement in the murder plot. She had, before the murder, she had used the Adelson name for the boys in a birthday invitation that was sent out. Her son testified against her. She said none of that was evidence. None of it was direct evidence. It's all circumstantial. And in addition, the evidence that, even though it was not very good evidence, or according to her, not evidence at all, came after the murder happened. And therefore, it couldn't be used to show that she intended, that she premeditated, that she did anything to help with the murder, because there's no evidence of intent or premeditation, according to her. And the evidence that she paid or intended to pay, really not there, but the murder was done before anybody got paid. This is her theory. There's also other evidence in the record, where they're going to flee to Vietnam. They're going to get their papers in order. The informer's testimony, you know all that evidence. But to her, none of it counted. And there was not enough evidence to convict her of murder one. Now, she relies on her murder one argument on another Tallahassee murder case that had happened 10, 12, 14 years before. And that was the murder of Mike Williams by his wife, Denise Williams, and his best friend. And we've got a slide with regard to this that we're going to pull up so that you'll be able to read along with regard to the information or the evidence in the case against Denise Williams. And I'm going to spend a little time talking about Denise Williams' case because you need to have a picture of the evidence in Denise's case against Denise so that you can compare it to the evidence in Donna's case against Donna. And as I say, I think the cases are different, and they're different in really important ways. And so Denise Williams had her murder conviction reversed on the grounds that there was not enough evidence. I don't think that's going to happen in Donna's case. But in order, as I say, to get a picture of it, you need to have a picture of what happened in Denise Williams' case and the background on Denise Williams' case. And as I say, I'm going to put up a slide so you can see all the what the evidence was in Denise's case. Some of you may have heard of the murder that Denise was convicted of. And it, had some attention nationwide. Certainly was a big case in the Tallahassee area because Mike Williams' body was not found, and law enforcement decided that he'd been eaten by alligators. And his mother, who said that her son had told her that never happens, it can't happen, spent the years after the disappearance holding a sign on a street corner, walking the streets of Tallahassee, doing anything and everything she could to engender support in the Tallahassee community so that the law enforcement would open up a case looking into the murder of her son, Mike. She did this for years. She was well known in Tallahassee. A lot of people thought she was just a kook because, law enforcement said he'd been eaten by alligators or crocodiles. I don't know which. I don't even know the difference between the two. They both slither along with big mouths and teeth. But that's an aside. So what Mike's mother was not able to do, Brian Winchester, the person with whom Denise Williams was having an affair, Mike Williams' best friend, was able to do. Denise Williams and Brian Winchester got married. They were married for a few years, finally broke up, were getting a divorce, did get divorced. And Brian was very upset about it. And he was apparently also worried that Denise might go to the police and say he was the murderer. In any event, he kidnapped her and held her for a couple of days, I believe. She was finally, released. And then Brian was worried that now for sure she was going to go to the police. She sent a message through Brian's ex-wife saying she wasn't going to say anything. And this, though, of course, now Brian is arrested for kidnapping. He wants to make a deal. So he now tells the story of how Mike Williams was killed. And what had happened was he had gone out on a boat with Mike Williams. Mike Williams was in waders, and Brian Winchester believed that if he pushed Mike Williams overboard, the waders would fill up with water. Mike Williams would drown. Mike Williams was an accomplished fisherman. He had practiced getting out of the waders because everybody knew that was a danger if you did that sort of fishing. He got out of the waders and could have swum to shore. And now Brian Winchester didn't know what to do, so he shot him and killed him and then got rid of the body. All right, so the evidence that was introduced against Denise Williams almost exclusively came from Mike Williams. And of course, he's not going to be the most credible witness. He's also kidnapped her. He wants a deal, and he got a deal. So his evidence is going to be looked at with at least some skepticism by the jury. And his evidence was that he and Denise were in love and they wanted to be together There's probably no argument about that was evidence in the record against her. She certainly married him thereafter. And that she didn't want to divorce her husband, Mike, because there's a stigma attached to divorce and she couldn't live with the stigma. Now, I'm doing another aside. I think that's insane. If there's a stigma attached to divorce, I don't know what the stigma would be for killing, for murdering your husband and the father of your child. Between the two, it seems to me the stigmas don't compute at all. But in any event, that, according to Brian Winchester, was a reason why she didn't want a divorce. They wanted to be together. If you want to be together, you can't get a divorce because there's stigma. Presumably, you can't leave your husband for your lover because there'd be a stigma there. So what do? Well, obviously, you decide to kill your husband. That seems to be the sensible solution. Brian Winchester also said that Denise wanted the insurance money that she'd get if Mike Williams died, and she wouldn't get it if they were divorced. So that was another incentive that she had. Now, the first time that they were supposed to go through with this murder plot, Brian Winchester says Denise backed out. She wanted him dead, but she didn't want to be a murderer, so she backed out. The second time, she agreed. So the evidence against her up until this point is she wanted to be with Brian Winchester. There was insurance money involved if he died. And this is coming from Brian Winchester. I don't know, stigma about divorce. That would be evidence that Brian Winchester could testify about. But the arrangement was that Brian and Mike would go fishing. Brian would push Mike into the water. Mike would die. And according to Brian Winchester, Denise agreed to that. Now, again, it's all coming from Brian Winchester. But evidence we do have that directly relates to Denise is 19 days after the murder, she applied to get insurance under the insurance policy. And there were 2 confrontations with Mike's mother because Denise and Brian did not want anybody to be pushing to open up a prosecution. So they had 2 confrontations with Denise. I think the second, at least, was a year after the murder. Maybe both were. And they apparently very acrimonious. And Denise told her mother-in-law, if you keep pushing this, I'll never let you see your daughter. And Mike's mother said, she wanted to see her daughter, but her first obligation was to her son. She continued to push from the time of the murder until the kidnapping. And Denise lived up to what she said. The grandmother, Mike's mother, never saw her granddaughter over that time. So the only other evidence in the record against Denise is the phone call that she made to her former sister-in-law saying, get a message to Mike that I won't say anything, which, it tends to say that she knew something about the murder. It doesn't say she was involved in the murder. Okay, so that's Denise's case. That's the evidence against Denise, almost exclusively coming from Brian Winchester, who has kidnapped her and has admitted to the murder. And what does he say? She wants out. She agreed that the way to do it was to get Mike killed. She backed out once. And what Brian says is the only thing affirmatively that Denise did to aid and assist in the murder. And remember, if you're going to be a principal, she didn't push Mike into the water. She's got to be a principal because she's helped Brian commit the crime. That's how she gets to be a principal. And that means she had to have done or said something to assist in the murder. The only thing that there's any evidence in the record about that she did or said anything to assist in the murder was Brian's testimony that she was supposed to encourage Mike to go fishing with Brian that morning, the morning that Mike was killed. What Brian testifies to is that was the deal. He doesn't even testify that she actually did it. That was the evidence. The appellate court said not enough for murder one, but important. The appellate court also said it's enough evidence for conspiracy, and conspiracy is a 30-year sentence. Donna also, remember, was convicted of conspiracy. And Denise is still serving that 30-year sentence for conspiracy. Now, let's look at Denise's evidence compared to Donna's evidence. In Denise's case, in the case of Mike's death, the murder was completed when Brian shot the gun into the head of Mike as he's swimming in the water, and he's dead. That's when the murder ends. There's no question about it. For Donna at her sentencing hearing kept saying, what did I do prior to, I forget, 9:30, I think she said a.m. on the day of the shooting. She called it the day of the murder. But as we know, it isn't the day of the murder, because the murder, remember, requires that you prove that Dan Markel is dead. Dan Markel didn't die until the day after the shooting. So as compared to Denise's case, first comparison that doesn't go is that Denise's involvement ends when the shooting occurs. Donna's involvement, even if we take her at simply it's when the crime ends, when the murder ends, it's the day after. And why is that significant? Because it's the night of the killing, when Dan Markel is in the hospital, still alive, that the evidence shows that Donna and Harvey arrived at Charlie's house, outside your house, 10 minutes, with the money to pay the hitman. And we get that part of it from testimony from Katie Magbanoa, that Charlie had said, my parents just left before you got here, and I now have the money to pay you. So on that ground alone, they are different cases. The jury is entitled to believe that the outside your house 10 minutes meant what it sounds to say, that she was outside Charlie's house the night of the shooting, not the night that Dan died. And the jury is entitled to believe Katie's testimony that Charlie said his parents had come to the house. They had just left before she got there, and what they had done was drop off the money. The definition of principal for first degree is paying or promising to pay the hitman. That's what constitutes aiding in the commission that makes you a principal. Sounds as though there's a huge difference between Denise Williams' case and Donna Adelson's case. But there's more of a difference than that, because a murder generally, the murder of Mike Williams ended when he was killed. A hire for hit doesn't end while payments are still being made. And Donna did not only, the jury believed the evidence, provide the money to pay for the shooting the night of the murder, but she continued to pay Katie Magbanoa, I think it was $3,000 a month. It was checks that Katie was supposedly sharing with Sigfredo and Luis for quite a period after that. In fact, she continued to pay until Sigfredo Garcia was arrested. That money continued to go to Katie. Murder for hire, as long as you're still paying, is still a murder. It hasn't ended yet. Another huge difference between Donna's case and Denise Williams' case. And of course, the third difference is that virtually all the evidence in Denise Williams' case came from Brian Winchester, who not only was a complicit or actually did the murder, but he had kidnapped her and got a deal at the time he provided the evidence. In Donna's case, yes, you have evidence from Luis Rivera, but the evidence from Luis Rivera describes his involvement and Garcia's involvement and how the actual murder happened. He's not really providing any information or much at all tying Donna to the murder. The evidence tying Donna to the murder, and remember, it was in the evidence. The jury is entitled to believe it and use it to decide. It did not have a reasonable doubt as to guilt. That evidence comes from things that Charlie said. It comes from the payment. It comes from the checks that she was writing at the Dental Institute paying Katie. Comes from the evidence that is clear without regard to Katie saying she never did any work for the money. It's also clear from the from the business's records and from the co-workers there that Katie was being paid for doing nothing. That's all evidence in the case. And then it's surrounded by other evidence from Donna. The crazy emails that she sent, her behavior at the bump, and of course, I don't know how else you can put it, her insane conduct when she was in jail. The evidence there comes from at least one of the informers, the two that talked about, but one in particular, Drina Bernhardt, who said that Donna had asked her if she would be willing to lie about Kata Magbanua. Now, Drina Bernhardt and the other informer who testified, Patricia Bird, were in jail with Katie Magbanua for a while. Now they're in jail with Donna. Donna wants to create some doubt by saying Katie Magbanua told these informers that Charlie had nothing to do with the hit, that Charlie's story, that he was being extorted by the killers. Remember that crazy story? That these two people in Miami drive all those hours to Tallahassee to kill somebody on the come. You kill them, and then you go to somebody and say, hey, if you don't pay us for this, we're going to make trouble for you. It's an insane theory. But Donna wanted the informers to testify about that. In other words, she would be suborning perjury. She not only did that, which is crazy enough because she's trusting jailhouse people in the jail who have every incentive to lie, to get a reduced sentence, to get out. But she also, if you remember the evidence at the trial, and I'm sure a lot of you watched this, I mean, it's insanity. She wrote out in her own handwriting the script that she wanted Drina Bernhardt to use to testify that Katie had said Charlie was never involved. I don't know how you can be more insane than that. And so the evidence at the trial was also this script in Donna's handwriting, which Donna doesn't contest. It is her handwriting. And she has a crazy story about that too. I'm not going to go into it here. If you want to hear more about it, I'd be happy to do more in depth. Just, email it, askprofjo@gmail.com. I'd be happy to do an episode on it if there's enough interest. But it's insane. Why you would put in writing, here's what I want you to say on the stand for me. Crazy. So that's the evidence, and that's pretty good. I mean, it isn't direct evidence that she intended to kill Dan and that had a hand in it, because maybe she was just afraid she was going to be convicted. And poor Donna, since she was afraid this Tallahassee jury was going to be out to get her, she thought she needed evidence on her side. She was innocent, but she needed evidence to help her. It's the same deal with the fleeing to Vietnam on a one-way ticket. Crazy story there too. But again, her claim is, we just wanted to go and rest. We would have come back if we had to. It doesn't mean I was conscious of guilt. Doesn't mean anything. It's just crazy. Anyway, the evidence against Donna is much more substantial than the evidence against Denise Williams. And now let's look at reasonable doubt. We have a clip on reasonable doubt. that I want you to hear, the reasonable doubt instruction. And I want you to hear it in part because I want you to imagine being a juror listening to the instruction and making sense out of the instruction. So I'll wait until we get that clip heard, and then I want to talk about this some.
Prove anything. Whenever the words reasonable doubt are used, you must consider the following. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt does not mean proof beyond all doubt. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt, a speculative, imaginary, or forced doubt. Such a doubt must not influence you to return a verdict of not guilty if you have an abiding conviction of guilt. On the other hand, if after carefully considering, comparing, and weighing all the evidence, there is not an abiding conviction of guilt, or if having a conviction, it is one which is not stable, but one which wavers and vacillates, then the charge is not proved beyond every reasonable doubt, and you must find the defendant not guilty because the doubt is reasonable. It is to the evidence introduced in this trial and to it alone that you are to look for that proof. A reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant may arise from the evidence, conflict in the evidence, or lack of evidence. If you have a reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant not guilty. If you have no reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant guilty. It is up to you to decide what evidence is reliable. You should use your common sense in deciding which is the best evidence and which evidence should not be relied upon in considering your verdict. You may find some of the evidence not reliable or less reliable than other evidence. You should consider how the witnesses acted as well as what they said. Some things you should consider are:
that clip came courtesy of Surviving the Survivor, Joel Wadman's podcast. The early clips on the jury instruction have come courtesy of Court TV. That's the reasonable doubt instruction. I have another clip that was out of order with regard to what Donna and Donna's lawyers say at sentencing. If we listen to that clip, fine, but I can certainly tell you they said not one iota.
And the people who did this are exactly where they deserve to be. But I had no knowledge that this horrible, evil act was going to take place. If I had become aware of this plan before Danny was murdered, I would have stopped it. With not one iota of actual evidence, the state convinced a Tallahassee jury that I solicited and conspired with other people to have Danny killed. Where is the evidence prior to the murder? The evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the state needed to prove their case. Where is the evidence before July 18th, 2014 at 10:50 in the morning?
Before you continue, Mrs. Adelson, as it relates to this statement, is the defense trying?
Okay, you heard her say, I still 10:30 in the morning on the day, she called it the day of the murder, but remember, it's not the day of the murder, it's the day of the shooting. And she's very clear that she wants that time and that day to be the closing point for saying murder. She's just absolutely wrong about it. And again, murder for hire goes beyond simply the death. It continues as long as the payments are being made. So now let me talk to you about this reasonable doubt instruction. You listen to it. I think it's very confusing. It says one thing and then it takes it away, and then it says it again, and then it takes it away. And most jurors end up saying beyond a reasonable doubt means that I have to be pretty damn sure. I can still have a doubt left because, but I shouldn't have a reasonable doubt as to the responsibility of the defendant for the murder. So a reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt. A speculative, imaginary, or forced doubt, well, we would know that, right? Such a doubt, that is the speculative, imaginary, possible doubt, must not influence you to return a verdict of guilty. That sounds good. But then we get, if you have an abiding conviction of guilt. That's not wrong, but, it starts making it complicated. Then we get to, on the other hand, if after carefully considering, comparing, and weighing all the evidence, there is not an abiding conviction of guilt, or if you have a conviction, it's one which wavers, then you have a reasonable doubt and you should acquit the defendant of the crime. And then the instruction says, look to the evidence. That's what you have to decide on. And you can decide, this particular part of the instruction is helpful. You can have a reasonable doubt based on what the evidence is, that the evidence is contradictory, or that something is missing. So reasonable doubt, that's the instruction the jury got. And the jury decided beyond a reasonable doubt. In other words, each juror had an abiding conviction of Donna's guilt on murder one, looking at the evidence, looking at the definition of principal, that she paid, that she promised to pay, that she continued to pay, and that she stopped at Charlie's house the night of the murder, or the night of the shooting. Now I'm doing it. The night of the shooting, to drop off the big payoff for the murder. So with that, I don't see any real likelihood that her murder one conviction will be reversed. Certainly not relying on Denise Williams' testimony. Now, it's always possible the appeals court is going to broaden. I don't think so. So I don't think there's any real chance of it. But even if the murder one conviction is reversed, Donna still is facing 30 years for conspiracy. And Florida doesn't have parole. So in Florida, there's something called an 85% rule. So if you do everything right in prison, you don't get into trouble, you can be released at the point at which you serve 85% of your sentence. Now, I'm not a math major. People who can't do math well sort of gravitate to law. But when I do the math, 85% of 30 years comes out to a little more than 25 years in prison. So the murder one conviction, even if it's reversed on appeal, she's still looking at a 25 plus year sentence on the conspiracy. And so in order to get a new trial, she's got to do a lot more than get the murder one conviction reversed. And she's not going to get the murder one conviction reversed. So, that's sort of the end of it. So that's my assessment of Donna Adelson and the likelihood of success in getting the murder one conviction reversed. I say it's 0. So now before I go off, I live with many, many pet peeves, and I thought I would share a pet peeve with you. And my pet peeves are all petty because, not because they're a pet. I think pet means, you just embrace them. But actually, my pet peeves drive me crazy. And the pet peeve that I want to talk about now is because it came up a couple of times today, is when you have to call, whether it's your doctor, your dentist, the store where you bought, or the online store where you purchased something, you're trying to make an appointment with the car dealer, you name it, and you get the automated system. Now that already is a pet peeve. But my major pet peeve is you then get this recording, where we apologize for the length of time you're going to have to wait before we reach your call because, quote, we're having an unusually large number of calls today. It's that is my pet peeve because you hear it every single time. So if it's happening every single time, then it's not an unusual occurrence. You better change your recording. Better yet, I would say hire more people, better yet, have real life people who take the phone calls and not recordings. So that's my pet peeve to end this episode. Thanks very much for joining. Please, please, please subscribe if you would. It doesn't cost you anything and it helps me. If you've got comments or questions, you can send them to askprofjo@gmail.com and I will try to respond to them. If there are a couple that seem, if I can, I will try to respond to them in a later episode. But I also would consider, as I said, doing an episode if there's enough interest in something and you don't think, I covered it enough for your satisfaction. I really would be happy to do it. But otherwise, ciao, which is also goodbye in Italian. So ciao is hello and ciao is goodbye. So long.